Bit of a disclaimer about this video from the start. It's titled Advanced Textures, but it's not really that advanced. All we're doing is we're going to be adding something called a gloss shader in order to make a material have a little bit more interest and a little bit less of a flat look. So basically what we're talking about here, and we're not going to use the house as an example. We're going to use two objects, a floor and a duck. Now we're looking at the duck there, the bright yellow duck sitting on the floor. It looks like a very flat, almost drawn duck on a piece of paper that's had a picture of some wood printed onto it. So basically we need to just add a little bit more interest to that by changing the basic shaders and the basic textures to gloss shaders and gloss textures. And if we change our duck to a gloss texture, all of a sudden the duck just looks a little bit nicer, and it has some reflections in it of itself and of the surrounding items. And you'd expect to see that sort of effect in the decal of a car, or in some plastic toys, or in fact on a window. So you need to be able to add that gloss shader. Some things have a very, very small amount of gloss on them, which means they reflect some light, so you can actually have the roughness of it, or you can change the roughness of it so that it reflects some of the color of other objects around it, but it doesn't reflect a pure looking image like this one does. We can also add a gloss shader to the floor, but we can see that that's not very convincing. So I'm going to show you a very simple trick in order to make it look a lot more convincing, by having just that subtle interaction between the duck and the floor, where the cracks still actually do not reflect light as you'd expect. And once you've got that, you can do things like animation quite well. This is not by any means advanced texture training. It's just basically a few tricks to give a little bit more depth to your particular renders. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how to add a gloss shader to the duck. So here we are looking at our duck in Blender, and I've got the duck selected, and I've got the yellow material selected as well. I'll make sure I've got preview turned on, and this is how we add a gloss shader. So we're going to be working mainly in the node editor, so I'm going to minimize the duck a little bit, or make the duck a bit smaller. And I've got my diffuse shader here, which you learned how to do a fair while ago, but you should have that set up for the duck. So basically I'm now going to add, and the first thing I'm going to do is add a mix shader, and I'm going to add the mix shader to between those two things. If you don't quite get that, if that just goes from there to there, you can drag that into the middle and it will just pop in the middle. Or you can click and drag from there, and then click and drag from there, which is your choice. The next thing I'm just going to do is add a shader, and this time I'm going to add a glossy shader, and I'm going to turn that into that one there. And you'll see now that it's quite a white sort of thing happening. One of the first things I'm going to do is probably change the color of that shader to more of a yellow, so that now it looks rather metallic in its thing. And that might be the effect you're going for, that sort of a slightly shiny, more metallic look. But I'm also going to turn the roughness down. And if you turn the roughness down, you do get that sort of clear look. You can also slide this factor through, and you can see that you'll get more yellow coming through and less shine. And you can play around with these sliders quite a lot. Playing around with the slider on this one here, the roughness here, doesn't do a whole lot unless you do an extreme amount. So that's more of a subtle setting, but you can change those around as you see fit in order to get the effect that you're looking for. I usually change this color to the color that matches. If you change it to something random like that, you see it doesn't quite make sense to do so. So you want to basically have it being roughly the same color as the actual diffuse shader, and that will work quite well. And that's how you set up a glossy shader. And if I actually view that as rendered, you can see that I get, or start to get, the reflections in there as it goes. We're now going to look at how to make the textured surface look glossy while still being a little bit believable by being able to hide those cracks so that the reflection does not reflect off the cracks. So now I want to be able to put a bit of a gloss or a bit of a reflective surface onto my wooden floor. So I'm going to click on my wooden floor, and you can see here I've got quite the usual image based texture with a mapping and a coordinate happening there. If I simply go and do the same thing again, so I'm going to go add texture, and I'm going to, sorry, not texture, shader, and go mix shader, and I'm going to put that one in between those two. You'll see that that's slid that out there nicely, and I've got a mix shader happening. I'm now going to add in my glossy shader in here like so, and you'll now see it's gone quite white, and you'll see over here it's quite white as well. So if I turn the roughness down, right down, you'll see that I get a very reflective surface. So if I actually go to render now, you see that I've got the duck appearing in there quite well, but it does go across this gap, this black area here between the two floorboards, and we don't want that. Now there are a number of ways you can resolve this, and if you go onto YouTube and look up Blender textures and realistic looking textures, there's extra things you can do. We don't really have time to teach that in this course, and this will simplify the process. All you need to do is take this color here and apply it to there as well, and all of a sudden that resolves all of those issues, because it's now actually making that reflection a sort of a factor of this color. You can play around with the factor and you can get more of a reflection there if you want it to be really shiny, but it'll still maintain that darkness through there as well. And you can put the roughness up of the diffuse, or you can put the roughness up here, and that'll go away pretty quickly if you do that. But if you want to just have a touch of roughness, which is what you'd expect, maybe 0. Delete that, 0.05 roughness. You can see there that it's starting to look like it would. It's not a perfect image, sort of a more of a blurry image down there, but it still actually does interact with that. So that's what you're expecting to see, and that's the kind of extra little detail that makes your render a lot more beautiful. Now if you're seeing these spots in here, particularly when you go render and render image, one of the things you'll probably need to do with these reflection settings is in this setting here, this scene setting here, you need to click on denoising, and you might need to increase the strength to 70% if you're still getting those little, what they call fireflies. I can see one right there near my mouse button, and there's a lot on the back side of this duck. They will go away when you do a proper render, because it will use this denoising feature to get rid of that, what we call noise.